I would like to say, I would like to say a few words. Good morning, Professor Sarmento. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends online. Welcome to the talk series on new ideas for researching and teaching interculturality, co-organized by School of Foreign Studies and Center for Area Studies in Estonia and the wider Baltic Sea region, Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, and hosted by Shanghai University of Finance and Economics and the University of Helsinki Joint Research Center on Intercultural Studies. I'm Coco Zhaoke from the Joint Center at SUFI. Today's talk will be co-hosted by Professor Ai Bing, you can see, Deputy Director of a Joint Center, and me. First of all, please allow me to introduce the background of the talk series and our first guest speaker today. This talk series is a continuity of our 2020 summer talk series on teaching about and researching interculturality in business contexts. Looking back more than 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, with many lives lost, livelihoods disrupted, interbusiness decreased, and overseas education of our youth curtailed. So we are now hoping for more passionate recalibration of global collaboration on urgent issues such as COVID-19 pandemic, wars, climate change, and resource scarcity. Dialogue, communication, and interculturalities are more needed than ever before. The talk series is designed and proposed to be of interest to researchers, teachers, educators, as well as graduate students who are currently involved in researching and teaching interculturalities in any of the following contexts: in business, in higher education, in experiences of mobility and migration, and governance. The invited speakers from academia and industry will share their research and reflections on challenges and opportunities for researching and teaching interculturality and international business communication, particularly in a post-COVID-19 era. Hopefully, discussions and collaborations will be inspired and sustained, particularly pertaining to interculturality and other related issues, such as language, identity, in the broader Chinese contexts. Next, I will be very, very pleased to introduce today's guest speaker, Professor Clara Sarmento. Professor Clara Sarmento is coordinator of the Center for Intercultural Studies of Polytechnic of Porto, Escape Porto, and Director of Master Programs in Intercultural Studies for Business. She's the author of numerous books, essays, and journal articles on Anglo-American studies, intercultural communication, and the Portuguese literature and culture. Today, she's going to talk about researching and teaching interculturality in higher education, highlights from a journey between science and business. Now, let's welcome Professor Sarmento, please.
Thank you so much. It's such a joy and a pleasure to be here. I'm so honored by your invitation. So should you allow me, I would start by sharing my screen.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So, and just please confirm if everything is correct right now.
Yeah. Yes, we can see that.
I'm just going to
enlarge
for
it.
To enlarge it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much once again. I would like to share some of the highlights from this journey between science and business, guided by interculturality. And I'll be trying to follow 3 main guidelines along my talk. First, somehow conceptual introduction to the notion of interculturality that we have been working with since 2007, the year of foundation of the Center for Intercultural Studies. Then I will try to make the connection between our concept of interculturality and business world where we all have to live, research, and work with and within. And last but not the least, I will try to share you some concrete case studies, some real life examples of how culture can be cultivated as a profitable commodity, as a tool and object not only of business development, but also of development of higher education. Therefore, I'm going to start my intercultural journey. Just allow me 1 minute. By saying that the contemporary intercultural travel is a global journey, a circumnavigation powered by the speed of new technologies. But intercultural transits have always been present, from the perverse intercultural dialogue of colonialism, current heteroglossia of the internet. This is why we propose to examine the motivations, characteristics, and regulations of cultural interactions in their perpetual movement, devoid of spatial or temporal borders, in a dangerous but stimulating indefinition of limits. This reflection approaches the topic of intercultural competence and the concept of interculturality as movement, as communication, dynamics, as encounter and synthesis between cultures, with the purpose of discussing their pragmatic consequences in academia and society. Ultimately, the objective of this conference are as scientific as political, because the intercultural stands at the junction of knowledge and politics. We will start by discussing this reflection with some approaches to different ideas of multiculturalism and interculturality, before proceeding to a definition of intercultural competence as the result of interdisciplinary dialectics, resorting to concepts of hybridity, cultural translation, contact zone, emergent and absent narratives, threshold, and intersecting discursive fields. The discussion will be located within the Western European and particularly Portuguese context. I assume a Western-centric perspective, which is always arguable, I know, and a clear preference for Portugal-related issues due to a long experience in teaching, researching, and fieldwork in this country. Portugal is also an excellent, although seldom explored, at least in the international level, case study as far as colonial and post-colonial narratives of dominance, hybridity, and intercultural contact are concerned, because of its recent and contemporary history. In fact, Portugal fits within Achille Mbembe's image of interweaving logics in a continuous improvisation and negotiation, since the country is still struggling with the reconstruction of its post-74 identity as a former colonial power, once central within its own empire, though always peripheral in Europe. As a result of the endless mobilities that travel the world today, the notions of belonging and homeland. I'm sorry, there is something going with the speaker. Can you hear me properly?
No, it's a little bit noisy.
Yes, but here is totally silent in my office.
Okay, so can we mute the other audience? 请大家静音好吗？其他的我们的听众静音。艾老师，你那边静一下音。Okay, sorry. Now let's continue.
No
okay, now it's better.
Okay, thank you so much. As a result of the endless mobilities that travel the world today, the notions of belonging and homeland have been reconceptualized in context of migration, deterritorialization, diaspora, virtuality, digitalization, and other features of the globalized world that make even more pertinent the principle by Stuart Hall that cultural identities are not fixed but fluid, not given but performed. In this way, we cross the first great border of intercultural transits, the frontier created by the concept culture itself, avoiding the commonplace notion of the intercultural as a mere us versus them, and steering clear of the fundamental error of an interculturality that ignores the diversity contained in its own definition. Hence, the present approach to the notion of intercultural functions as a sort of third space, to quote from Homi Bhabha, a third space for hybridity, subversion, and transgression. Hybridity and cultural translation, which Baba regards as a synonym for hybridity, is politically subversive. Hybridity is the space where all binary divisions and antagonisms typical of conservative political and academic concepts, including the old opposition between theory and practice, critical reflection and politics, science and humanities, do not work anymore. They do not work in intercultural competence either, since we understand it as the capacity for unceasing movement, communication, and cooperation between cultures. These actions carried out in the peripheries, and which are in turn central in the lives and experiences of individuals, can be designated and described more or less metaphorically as border zones, thresholds, intersecting discursive fields, or spaces on the side of the road, all of them reflecting the dialogic nature of culture and intercultural competence. Therefore, intercultural competence is the place where the overlapping of cultures occurs, which is the characteristic of a site of cultural translation. Cultural translation, both as Judith Butler's Return of the Excluded and as Homi Bhabha's hybridity, is a major force of contemporary democracy, also in the academic field. For Judith Butler, the universal, here understood as a synonym of hegemony, a Gramscian combination of power and consent, can only be conceptualized in articulation with its own peripheries, the aforementioned border zones, spaces on the side of the road, and other metaphors. Thus, what has been excluded from the concept of universality forces this same concept from the outside, from the margins, to accept and include it again, which can only happen when the concept itself has evolved enough to include its own excluded. To the process through which universality readmits its own excluded, Butler calls translation. Cultural translation may work as the return of the excluded, pushing limits, bringing about epistemological changes, and opening new spaces for free discussion and independent research. Because for Bhabha, just like for the Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos, the potential for change is located at the peripheries. Peripheries marked by hybridity, where the new arrivals or excluded, like polytechnics and universities from peripheral countries and regions like ours, like unconventional research groups, like young female academics, for instance, they are able to use subversion to undermine the strategies of the powerful, regardless of who they are. When talking about the intercultural experience, it is tempting to talk on behalf of the others, but seldom do we grant a voice to those others themselves. However, the true intercultural experience occurs when we are able to see ourselves and our work as if we were those so-called others whose otherness originates, for example, from their nationality, gender, orientation, academic background, or field of research. Let us remind Derrida. He has shown how the construction of an identity is always based on exclusion, and that a violent hierarchy results from such dichotomous pairs as in binomials that we have here: man, woman, white, black, colonizer, colonized, straight, gay, elite, the masses, and nowadays also in science and technology versus arts and humanities, or culture versus business, while we all support culture and business together. The key skills for intercultural competence rely on interdisciplinarity and creativity in order to generate a productive intervention both in science. Creative interdisciplinary approaches to the intercultural phenomenon are therefore likely to select unexpected fields of study with their own hybrid methodologies. Intercultural competence and capacity for dialogue between cultures are not a mere passive acceptance of the multicultural factor, nor the utopia of complete harmonization, but rather an essential component of every culture that wishes to assert itself as such. This type of dialogue occurs among individuals who speak different languages and for whom words and objects have got diverse meanings. However, this does not result into a new Tower of Babel nor into social chaos, because there is an attempt at communication and there is something that is actually shared, which is exactly what allows awareness of and openness to difference. When differences are left aside and considered as non-existent, the result is an insufficient understanding of self and others. Because cultures are monolithical only when seen from the outside or from a distance. When they are seen closer or from within, it is easy to understand that cultures are constituted by many and often conflicting versions of themselves. Local and global practices and knowledge do not form a dichotomy. Instead, their correlation provides a stimulating dynamic tension as the search for local concepts generates new concepts which encourage the challenge of epistemological and phenomenological adaptation under a genuine interdisciplinary and intercultural perspective. Any approach must be located within the network of ideological and material contexts of a given region, which is always an evolving territory. Questioning one's identity in relation to others is part of intercultural competence, as the work of analysis and of acquiring knowledge applies to others as much as to oneself. So, more than ever, intercultural competence is to be practiced both at home and abroad, since their scope may encompass the relations between distant Eastern and Western cultures, as much as between marginal and mainstream, youth and senior, rich and poor, erudite and popular cultures within the same society, which is only apparently cohesive. Still, the need for intercultural understanding among such diversity is often neglected in favor of issues facilitated by distinctive ethnic markers. If we forget to exercise intercultural competence at home, how will we be able to analyze, for instance, the deep cultural rifts that exist between generations within the same white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family, for instance, or the growing gap between rich and poor in the receiving Western economies, or the stereotypes that too often underpin the political dialogue between the countries of Northern and Southern Europe, to name but a few. Michael Chapman argues that, unlike in his home country, South Africa, in societies where language, race, religion, class, and comfort are reasonably homogeneous, like in Portugal, cultural memory hardly needs to be invoked in the daily round. However, the more homogeneous a society is, the easier it is to conceal the manipulation of its cultural memory by the politics of power. Likewise, within the only apparent homogeneity of Portugal, there are profound cultural differences between urban centers and rural countryside, coast and inland, north and south, capital and periphery, that, although devoid of visible ethnic markers, require intercultural competence so that dialogue and knowledge may emerge. Only then is it possible to confront the contact zone, the threshold between what we take to be the image of a culture and what is in fact involved in that culture. When intercultural competence is put into practice as we understand it, narratives gradually emerge from a centuries-old silence, narratives that have been straightforward, absent from history, to adapt once more the concepts developed by Boaventura de Sousa Santos. Emergent narratives grant a voice to subaltern groups, to all those others history is slowly recognizing. These narratives generate a source of vital information that complements official history and is absent from the canon of great narratives with their underlying discourse of power. It is then possible to understand the infinite diversity of human experience, as well as the risk it faces of wasting fundamental experience due to the limits and exclusions imposed by strict, isolated areas of knowledge. Here, we may recall the already mentioned thresholds, border zones, contact zones, and intersecting discursive fields. But while borders imply obvious barriers to be challenged, thresholds emerge as subtle intellectual constructions, which, surprisingly or not, are rarely part of the academic institutional routine. They imply access rather than a dividing line and suggest a potential for making the academic territory more collaborative and intellectually powerful through new processes of identification and interaction. That is to say, through new processes of intercultural competence. We will now focus on the potential of such processes of intercultural competence for inclusive teaching, research, and entrepreneurship, because we are aware that globalization has reshaped patterns of cultural consumption in a world more than ever dominated by images, sounds, texts, symbols, and virtuality that we are now working on. This connectivity, this permanent connection, influences societies, lifestyles, and the way products are created, reproduced, and commercialized. We are also aware that ideas, knowledge, and information are drivers of creativity, and that cultural assets and human creativity are inexhaustible sources and resources available all over the world in all countries with both cultural and economic value. Therefore, culture becomes a profitable commodity, an asset for any expanding company or university, a tool and an object of business and economic growth to be understood and managed with the same accuracy, technique, and knowledge as any other asset. So I'll be now sharing with you this standpoint that I've been sharing with you will be now illustrated through an example of research and teaching interculturality in higher education. And this example is located at the Polytechnic University of Porto in the north of Portugal, where I am right now, more exactly at the SCAP that you can see on the image, the business school of the Polytechnic University of Porto, and SCAP is also the location of the Center for Intercultural Studies that has been established in 2007 and whose research we have been using through this tool. The Center for Intercultural Studies, which I invite you to visit at least virtually on the first stage here at the website that is permanently updated and has got a Portuguese and an English version. So they are exactly the same. The contents that you have on the Portuguese version are exactly the same that you have on the English version and are also permanently updated. Sorry. The Center for Intercultural Studies has been developing many actions along the years, and I'm going to focus this presentation, this second part of my presentation, on three subsections. First, one on research, the research that we have been developing on interculturality applied to business, this long journey in general. Then a second subsection on how we have been applying this into teaching. And last but not least, an actual example of a research project that has been managed and face it as a driver of actual business. So what was the rationale, the reason for the creation of the center in 2007, 15 years ago? We wanted to blend the research on intercultural studies that was actually being carried on by the academic staff to the mission of the Business School of Oporto. Apply research on interculturality to business and to the way it is taught and practiced in Portuguese higher education. So our approach to cultural and intercultural studies focus from the onset on the contemporary social and economic context. And as far as methodologies are concerned, we've always followed an interdisciplinary approach like the one that I have been trying to describe in the first theoretical part of my presentation. Sorry. And always applying new research methodologies, studying and analyzing and creating case studies and applying good practices that are taught by our partners all over the world. In general, our research is around three main lines of research: intercultural theories and practices, one; cultural communication, that's the second; and last but not the least, intercultural business. The guidelines of this journey between science and business have been, roughly speaking, the awareness of intercultural education as an effective vehicle for entrepreneurial skills, the potential of global, national, and local, both modern and traditional, both erudite, cultural, and sources. If we face them under this approach, we can see that these cultural sources are intercultural at the same time, because global and local, modern and traditional, erudite and popular. We also use scientific research for the benefit of dialogue with socio-economic actors. We associate entrepreneurs, academics, researchers, and students to the goals and opportunities of the cultural sector. We put into practice one of our most sound guidelines, new critical and reflective capabilities, as well as new perspectives on comprehensive citizenship, with the purpose of stressing the value of cultural expression, competitive business environments. We must bear in mind that we are working with mostly within the at least we are based on the Portuguese context. And we must also bear in mind that for culture is an identity element with a very strong tourist attraction potential, therefore with a strong business potential. Cultural entrepreneurs and tourist agents focus on preservation, enhancement, and exploration, some exploitation of Portuguese culture as a value for tourism and business. And last but not least, we must bear in mind that one of the 15 countries with the highest number of cultural heritage items and sites certified by UNESCO, 17 tangible and 8 intangible. So more than ever, culture and our assets. Bearing this rational methodologies and guidelines in mind, what have been so far the main outputs of the Center for Intercultural Studies? I'm going to state most of them, and then I will zoom in detail some of them. So, of course, obtaining financial research projects, editing the electronic journal of intercultural studies, providing awards, grants, and internships to our graduate and postgraduate students. As we said before the start of this conference, promoting several conferences, seminars, and publications, establishing networks and partnerships all over the world, and creating, accrediting, and teaching the Masters in Intercultural Studies for Business. I'm going to zoom into some of these, our main outputs so far. For instance, and how these outputs illustrate the research guidelines that we're here conceptualizing. So far, we have published a bit more than 20 books, national and international edition. 50% of these books are written fully in English with the global distribution. I'm also going to focus on some of how they clearly illustrate our research guidelines right now. And so far, we have also organized more than 200 seminars, conferences, and masterclasses. I cannot resist point the one that you have on your lower right side of the screen, visual storytelling from the mural to the digital that we have just organized less than 1 month ago with the University of Aveiro, a very interesting one, and one that you have above on education and migrations, the first on-site event, the first on-site international conference that we had after the lockdown was lifted here in Portugal. So it was a very emotional and socially significant event for us here. But we also have the e-journal of Intercultural Studies, open to collaborations from all over the world, that was founded in 2013. And as just last month, in May 22, we have just issued the number 10 to 2022 issue now online. And this is a Scopus indexed journal, therefore it is recognized. We are very happy to say that we publish side-by-side works not only by researchers and scholars from the institution and from all over the world, but also from our graduate and undergraduate students that wish to communicate to the world research that they produce on intercultural studies applied to business. Of course, allow me to say that we also produce classical research articles in peer-reviewed indexed journals with impact. Some of them have attracted the attention and the citations from UNESCO, or are quite well placed at the most downloaded and read articles in some of the journals. But let's get more specific, perhaps. Let's zoom into some books that have been published and edited by the center, and that attest this movement towards business and a pragmatic applied research on interculturality. For instance, I can share with you one of our first international books in 2010. It wasn't the first at all. The first one was Eastwards, Westwards, Which Direction for Gender Studies in the 21st Century. It was published in 2007 with contributions from China, Japan, Kazakhstan, and the Middle East, a quite interesting volume. But in this case, of 2010, the Theater of Shadows, Women in the Portuguese Colonial Empire, was still directed towards the research of gender issues in the Portuguese history and so-called first globalization that was a very arguable consequence of the so-called discoveries. However, we received very honorable reviews from the International Asian Studies Association newsletter, Journal of Global History. But then we started to move towards a more practical approach, therefore more blended with the mission of our business school. And then we have published in 2013, From Here to Diversity, Globalization and Intercultural Dialogues, also with a strong input of works and reflections from the Middle East and Far East, and that deserved an invitation to be present in the Second World Forum on Intercultural Dialogue in Baku in 2013, a long time ago already, bearing in mind the recent developments of the world. And fast forward, moving on towards the present, in 2020, when the pandemic was hitting Portugal for the first time, we issued Cultural Tourism and Heritage in Northern Portugal. I'm going to develop it a little bit further. And this year, in January, we issued the book that specifically deals with intercultural business, and it was launched early this year, and we are glad to say that it has already attracted the award of the International Impact Book Award Association. But now let's move now specifically towards the contents of cultural tourism heritage in northern Portugal, because this is a very specific cultural territory with a high potential for the practice and research of business. So I think it is quite symbolic and illustrative to see how the book is divided into 3 sections, all of them based on research, also clear case studies and good practices of how research in culture is applied to teaching higher education and also to business and entrepreneurship with actual project, with actual businesses being created with success. So first we have the section on cultural roots on the city's walls that is all related to tourism around street art, not only in Porto, that is booming right now. The cultural tourism moved by street art is now thriving in Porto and in northern Portugal, but also with some comparative approaches to similar cases in Lisbon, the capital in the south, and also in Brazil, where we have Bahia, where we have São Paulo, especially those 2 locations where cultural tourism around street art is already a reality. The second section on research, we have here the title Research and Cultural Entrepreneurship, but actually is research for cultural entrepreneurship. Works with some cases on intelligent systems for personalized points of interest and routes, there is to say artificial intelligence for the generation, for the creation of personalized routes of cultural, literary, and architectonic, and all other approaches to culture that I'm going to develop within a minute or so. Also, studies on literary tourism, thriving, booming in Portugal, because people actually visit the country and take touristic routes to see the places where Camilo Castelo Branco, Essa de Queiroz, José Saramago have located their narratives, their novels. Also, another interesting case study on border tourism that is actually an opportunity, because if we think about Portugal, the territory of the country is divided. Half of the country is bordered with Spain, half of the country is bordered with the sea. So all that, what we call Raya, all that border zone between Portugal and Spain has developed a specific culture, a specific language, specific territories that have their own practices, their own gastronomy, their own codes, their own paths that you can visit that are opportunities for tourism and for business. And moving towards the sea, of course, that the sea is one of the standing points of Portuguese economy and also for tourism. So we have 2 interesting cases of business created specific types of boats and their natural environments that we have here in the north of Portugal. So we have Costa Nova and Ria de Aveiro, 2 specific ecosystems, very specific locations, even in natural terms, with their own specific traditional boats that are being recovered and used now for tourism. Also, another interesting case in Esposende, here in the north coast, of underwater heritage for tourism, because people actually visit, and we have amateur divers that actually go and visit the underwater archaeological site. And last but not the least, another thriving possibility for business and tourism, that is the route of Santiago de Compostela, because the traditional centuries-old pilgrimage routes can also be considered assets for tourism. And the most recent book that we have, Concepts and Dialogues Across Shifting Spaces, but what really matters is intercultural tourism. That is the main point, the stemming point of the title that has just been issued, again in English, fully in English, with global distribution by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, sorry for the publicity. And so also this book is structured in a very illustrative way of how we face and how we put research into practice. We start with a classical approach to intercultural business as us versus them. There is to say how difficult, how challenging it is to, for instance, in the first chapter, to do business between the United States of America and Japan, different cultural practices. So this is a classical approach. But then zooming into approaches more related to our concept of interculturality, we start by studying the role of education for intercultural communication in business, the importance of language, translate language, but also translate concepts and ways of communicating, all the pragmatics that goes along with the simple Google translating of words. Then the importance of interculturality for effective marketing, because what works in Portugal does not work in Afghanistan. Just give you an example. And then once again and again and again, tourism as the epitome of intercultural business. Then also another chapter on social media, when you talk about viral society, the importance of social media, as I think that social media is a perfect example of an interculturality that works at the speed of light, as I said at the beginning of my talk. The importance of the intercultural dialogue in social media as a driver of business and as one of the standpoints of modern contemporary business. Also, the importance of cultural heritage, once and again, for the creation of business, with some interesting case studies in France, Germany, and Spain. To be more precise, in France, with the recovery of former industrial sites as museums. In Germany, tourism related to the Holocaust and concentration camps, so the dark tourism. And last but not the least, the tradition of tomatina in Spain, a folklorical practice, a very local culture that yet attracts thousands and thousands of visitors every day. There is to say how local sites, very specific, very local sites and their cultural heritage, forsaken, somehow forgotten, related to ages and ages before now, can be recovered, refurbished, and presented to the public as thriving business. And also the importance of a good translation in business communication, in this case related to a specific case study of wine tourism that is very important in Portugal and Spain, for instance. Again, another approach to underwater cultural heritage, this time not in the north of Portugal, but in the southern coast of Alentejo, a deprived secondary area of the country with an immense touristic potential. Business relations in general, but now the three last chapters are also an interesting illustration of another direction that our research might take. Is talking about human rights, audit and accounting, and law in general. We have to bear in mind how culture influences the law and how law influences business, because business must obey the local and international law. However, the laws that are in practice in Portugal, that is Roman law, has nothing to do with the common law that is in practice, for instance, in the UK, that is such a common business counterpart of the Portuguese economy. And yet we have to bear in mind how we are dealing with totally different legal systems, how they are influenced by tradition, by history, by culture, and how these legal systems ultimately influence the way that we do business and the way that we can develop our economy. So these last 3 chapters are also interesting. Yes, I don't take my word for that, but more than anything, they illustrate some of the intercultural and interdisciplinary methodologies that intercultural studies for business should should put into practice in order to be actually useful for business. If we want to research interculturality in a practical, useful way for business, legal studies cannot be set aside, and an effective interdisciplinarity must be always present. But let me also tell you about some finance research projects with international impact by our teams. I'm going to zoom into the first one, that is the Street Art Say project, which has had a huge impact on mainstream media, the national television, national and private TV channels, the printed press, the radio. It has been awarded the Santander University Bank Award for academic projects with a high social impact. And it has generated contracted services to town halls. Local town halls have actually hired our researchers to design routes of tailor-made cultural tourism for those locations. I'm going to talk about this because this is going to be our case study of research as business. We are also the center, the intercultural research at the center is also involved in the cost action financed by the European Union, writing urban places, new narratives of the European city. And we are happy to say that we have also designed an exhibition to the project Google Arts and Cultures on the local, a very interesting museum of contemporary sculpture of Santo Tirso, therefore providing international impact and visibility to that small town in the north of Portugal. These are 4 projects, each one with its own international consortium. And the combined budget of the 4 consortia of these projects, where the center is part of, their combined budget is more than 1 million euros. That for us is immense, that we have our own dimension. For instance, the Root project is all about artificial intelligence used for generating personalized routes of cultural tourism. And when I say cultural tourism, which routes, which items of culture am I referring to? Heritage, architecture, gastronomy, literature, wine, simple walk. Sorry, some interference. Okay, sorry. Sorry for interruption. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, it's all on mute. Thank you so much. So I was saying that in the Root project, artificial intelligence is used for the generation of personalized routes of cultural tourism. The Endent project is a simple one of English for the technical formation of dentists. The augmented assessment and the ending projects are both ongoing ones, all of them financed by the European Union. The augmented assessment is using augmented reality to assess the skills of newly arrived migrants in mathematics and science. And the ending project is all about internet security for young students in 3 countries in order to prevent the earlier than expected school leaving due to bullying and all those social problems. But what really matters here in this standpoint is that research indeed generates profit. Research indeed is a business. If we bear in mind that the 4 consortia have attracted to the university a huge amount of financing, and their combined budget is more than 1 million euro. So now, attesting how once again attesting and zooming into teaching, how research actually, research on interculturality actually creates budget, is a financial asset for the university, how it can be applied in a lucrative way to teaching in higher education. All the research that we have developed in interculturality was applied to the creation of a master's in intercultural studies for business. This master's is fully taught in English. It has been accredited, it has to be accredited, if not, it cannot open, by the National Agency in 2016 for the maximum possible of 6 years. And I'm glad to tell you that last week we received the new reaccreditation for another round of 6 years. Every year we open 45 places. So far they have been fully taken. This master's has got 2 double diplomas with partner French universities, the Université d'Artois in Arras in North France, and the ISIT in Grande École in Paris. The ISIT is the Institute of Intercultural Management and Communication. So our students can take half of their degree here and half in Paris or in Arras or vice versa, and that has happened. And if they want to proceed their studies at PhD level in Spain, we have protocols with universities of Vigo, Salamanca, and Santiago de Compostela. Oh, by the way, just there is an interesting sideline, is that one of our graduate projects has just been awarded the runner-up, the 2nd place in the Portuguese Football Foundation Award, because she produces a very interesting project on intercultural studies applied to the business that is football. Why? Because this graduate project was about the intercultural integration of displaced football players as an asset, as a possibility for their improved performance in sports that we know is also a business. But please let me share with you the structure of the course, what we actually teach. So we teach English culture for business, also French, German, or Spanish culture for business, always applied to business, to prepare our students, culturally speaking, for being excellent, we hope, business agents within the cultural areas of English, Spanish, German, and French influence. And of course, that we don't restrain our range of teaching and researching to Europe only, of course not. We bear in mind, for instance, in the case of Spanish culture, we bear in mind Latin America. When talking about English, we speak about the whole Commonwealth. We also have courses on culture and development. Also, one of our most popular options, culture, Chinese, Mandarin, or Arabic language and culture in business, 3 levels. Entrepreneurship in culture, intercultural communication technologies, and at the end, the students have got a full semester devoted to either a dissertation, a project, or a professional internship with the respective report. In terms of international network, the course, the master's, has got specific internship, mobility, and collaboration protocols with so many. Incubate Business Consulting, the Portuguese High Commission for Migrations, that's an honor for us, the National Association of Women Entrepreneurs, publishers, and the Elegant Club of London, the Koblenz University of Applied Sciences in Germany, and St. Joseph University in Macau, China, one of our long-lasting and dearest partners for research and teaching. And every year we have very interesting Zoom seminars on entrepreneurship in creative industries, one of the highest moments of our academic year, gladly provided by our partners in China. Also, if the students don't to a course that grants them a degree, they can take simpler postgraduate courses, also fostered by our research on intercultural studies in general, on interculturality in general, and supervised by the Porto Executive Academy that is also located at our business school. We have cultural resources for business, science, entrepreneurship, and innovation, dwelling with how can science and research be transformed into actual business. And we have just had the postgraduate course on intercultural mediation, very important for the issue of migrations and integrations of refugees. We are in Europe, so it's easy to understand how important, how urgent this topic is. So we also have a postgraduate course on intercultural mediation. So as you can see, all these research on interculturality that we have been describing can be applied to education, and that attracts students. Many of them are international students. Let's be pragmatic. This attracts their fees and their personal investment in the region, because they come here, they stay here, they also contribute to the economic development of the northern region. There is to say, also, all this sequence, research applied to education that attracts students, this also generates money, business, and general development. But I touched this point a few moments ago about a research project that is created, managed, and considered a business. So let me just provide a few more details on the project Street Art Say that I had already mentioned a few minutes ago. Once again, please visit the project. It is accessed every day by the 5 continents, and China is one of our most regular visitors to the web page of the project. So streetartsay.com, because this is a virtual museum. A virtual museum and a digital archive of street art works in Porto and northern Portugal. And it's not very common to talk about street art in Porto and northern Portugal, because in Portugal, usually we focus on the street art that is available southwards in the capital, Lisbon, but there is a living open-air free museum of street art all over the northern side of the country. And our virtual museum has more than 4,500 images in permanent update. We are constantly on the field doing field work. And these images are distributed along 14 geographical routes, organized in 33 maps and 372 points of interest. We have been developing this project since 2017. And this is a tool for, I know that we are aware that this virtual museum is a tool for research, because it is a virtual museum, a digital archive, but this is also a tool for tourism, that is to say for business, because of the roots, because this project, this museum is organized into geographical routes. So the routes of street art can be used and experienced by visitors and by tourists. It offers also an asset for tourism and business. So let's explore, if you allow me, the website just a little bit. I don't trust the internet connection, so I'll show you some stills from the website. So this is the opening page, and you have here, research, investigação means research, and here academics can access in open access articles, dissertations, chapters produced by the project researchers. Then you have the core of the project, of the business that is the project, the roots. And you start by opening the roots in Porto, the core of the project. And when you click in Porto, you open the existing roots, that they are accessible, they are safe, they are easily accessible, and they are organized around recognizable and accessible landmarks and name it accordingly. For instance, if you look at Route of Boulogne and Route of Marrakech, they are landmarks that you can easily access and recognize on any city map of Porto. And for instance, Marrakech is a subway station, so you can easily access this, the start of the route. Then you also have the routes in Greater Porto. And the routes in Greater Porto, they are located in satellite cities nearby, also in the north. You have like Vila do Conde, Senhora da Hora, and other easily accessible. They are accessible by subway everywhere. And all these routes are ongoing projects in permanent expansion and in permanent update. And you also have a routes in Aveiro, a nearby city, a small city 50 kilometers south of Porto. But let's be more specific. So you open one of these routes, for instance, route of Marrakech, and what do you see? You see the maps. You see the maps with the points of interest. So you can see on your right side menu, you have the route, you have the several maps. Each route has between 1 and 5 maps, no more than that, or else it will become too confusing. And each map is divided on several, about 10, between 10 and 20 points of interest that you have listed here on your right side menu. And then you click on one of the points of interest and you open the respective photo archive of the image that you find on each point of interest. And they can go from 1 to way more than 100 images. This is what happens when you click on the point of interest. This is what you can find. You find the respective archive of that place in town. And here you can see some of images. And then again, you can see here some of the images, zooming into more, the visual archive that you have on this point of interest. You have images captured along the timeline of the project, that is to say between 2017 and the present, all the images that have been created, all the works of street art that have been available on this specific tiny point of interest, a very small street, Rua das Carvalheiras, a very small street here in the route of Marrakech, on the first map of the route of Marrakech in Porto. This is just a simple, straightforward example of one of the many, many points of interest that we have scattered along the several maps and the several routes of the project only in Porto. This is one of the cases, just trying to illustrate a bit more. And in this case, you have in the nearby small city of Vila do Conde by the sea, as you can see on the map. And in this case, you have the example of a commission mural that is celebrating the local fishing community that is located in the city market. Another example, another map, another point of interest. Here you have in the nearby city of Aveiro, it has roughly 45,000 inhabitants. And here, one of the maps and one of the pieces of street art that you can see on the specific point of interest, Cais do Alboi, the Alboi Pier. Therefore, through the routes of street art, works become accessible to the public, whether they are irreverent and illegal or ratified and commissioned by institutions, whether they stand in high visibility tourist spots in the city center or in remote alleys of the outskirts. They are all available to our audience and possible visitors. But after creating the geographical routes, we have also developed routes by author. That is to say, when we have an artist whose signature, whose style is recognizable, the famous names of street art in Porto, We have also created routes around the works of these artists that are available in our geographical territory. And we have generated 16 routes by author, also with more than 200 points of interest and nearly 500 specific images. And you have names that for us are very important and that actually attract visitors like Azul, Mr. Dale, Musk, Ochre, and Caver, and Rafi, to tell you but a few. And here you have an example, the route of the artist Azul. You have the map, a very prolific artist, as you can see, and all over Porto, scattered all over the historical center of Porto, and one of the specific points of interest, combining the artwork and the landscape, which is always very attractive for tourists. Just, I know I'm about to end, don't worry, please. I know I'm taking a long time, but this is an exciting project, not going to take much longer. There is just in a nutshell, there is a parallel ongoing project on roots of street music with interviews and data about the street performers, their repertoire, their social experience, relation with audience and authorities. This is an ongoing project. And last but not the least, we also have arquivo. This means archive with collections of images donated by volunteers, and we are so proud, that fall, but these images, these collections, they fall outside the time and space context of the project. That is to say, they have been taken before 2017, and they are in areas or in countries not yet researched by the project. But one last point, a few comments. Street art functions as an unexpected sensorial and intellectual challenge during the everyday experience of the city. Street Art Say, the project, simply proposes a method for mapping such works that tell us a story about site-specific dynamics and urban cultural geographies. By mapping these artworks, meaningful itineraries emerge and walking becomes the reading of a visual story instead of a mechanical displacement of the body. The democratic use of the urban space entails a free personal interpretation of the artworks inscribed on the walls. Both our map builders and map users are asked to pick their way through the conglomeration of images, symbols, colors, letters, materials, and types that pervade the pages of the streets in order to read the book that is the city. Thus, instead of portraying the city as a labyrinth, mapping generates a self-conscious positioning as well as a living understanding of the urban fabric. And then what happened? COVID-19 hit Portugal for the first time in March 2020. And this brought a very specific social context to the narratives of street art, which impacted the framework of their interpretation. During the two strict national lockdowns and in the months of uncertainty that mediated between them, street art became an even more familiar element of the city, contemplated with renewed attention while we adapted our gaze to horizons that were necessarily closer. Therefore, in April 2020, the researchers of the Street Art Say project decided to use their experience and methods to catalog the works of street art that would appear overnight in the streets of Porto during the lockdown, as well as the artworks that refer to the pandemic crisis itself. This is how the spin-off project Street Art Against COVID was born, with the mission of showing the world through the international reach of the project's digital channels that street art had not ceased to reinvent itself in the streets of Porto, and also that the city's tourist potential was more alive than ever. By the summer of 2021, the Street Art Against COVID website had more than 300 images, distributed over 80 points of interest, organized into 7 routes, and had been granted the Santander Bank Unique COVID Award for academic projects with high social impact. This peculiar story of art and grief together is further narrated in the homonymous zine, Street Art Against COVID, a semi-marginal journal with only 100 numbered and unique copies that was launched in September last year with contributions by academics, junior researchers, and street artists side by side. And all this research, the Street Art Against COVID project, is also fully openly available on Street Art Say webpage. So everything is open to the public and accessible everywhere. You just need to click on the logo of the Street Art Against COVID project and you can access the full website that we have. Therefore, and to conclude, how can we consider this research project a business, this intercultural research project a business? Well, actually, Street Art Say creates value, it generates income through the contribution that it produces for the contents taught in the postgraduate courses in entrepreneurship, international business, cultural resources for business, the MA in Intercultural Studies for Business of the Porto's Polytechnic, and this attracts students and the respective fees. The younger researchers, mostly they also host organized tours around the roots of street art. See? We also received the actual money from the Santander Unique COVID Award for academic projects with social impact. The dissemination that brings publicity, that brings international impact, is performed through online platform, the social media, the mainstream national media, and I'm talking about TV, radio, printed press, and bear in mind that the national TV channel 1 dedicated 5 extensive pieces to the project broadcast on prime time. And this is free publicity to the institution that if it were to be paid, it would imply a huge investment that the university cannot afford. And yet the research that we developed attracted that publicity in prime time with, I'm talking about the Portuguese amount of the audience, I'm talking about 500,000 viewers, and that is a lot for us. This all, of course, along with regular classical scientific articles, books, chapters, conferences, and dissertations. The project also created research grants and jobs in science for students and young graduates. In order to promote local tourism and economy, satellite municipalities from Greater Porto have commissioned well-paid, tailor-made routes of street art through their regions. There have been signed mobility and cooperation protocols with universities with similar research projects. The Street Art Say project has also been integrated in the cost action that I have already referred, Writing Urban Places. And last but not the least, as attested by Google Analytics, there has been a daily access in 5 continents by countries such as China, which provides a high international impact for the project and an increased visibility for the host institution. So, as we could see, Street Art Say grants visibility to local artists and communities in their symbolic interaction with a territory threatened by mass tourism and gentrification. The project fosters the recognition of their creative value among multiple stakeholders, such as local municipalities, mainstream media, agents of local economy, art galleries, tourists and tourism agencies, academia, and the scientific community. Street Art Say is an intercultural project that takes place in a border zone, the ones that I mentioned 1 hour ago, between the legal and the illegal, where researchers play the role of mediators crossing discursive fields in permanent intersection. Therefore, Street Art Say is a case study of intercultural communication between marginal and dominant, youth and adult, erudite and popular cultures, all within the same territory. It proves that business agents can prosper with diversity of human culture and with the contribution of academic research, that is to say, by recognizing the value of interculturality. Thank you so much for your patience and attention.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sarmento, for a wonderful talk. It's very, very illuminating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then we'll invite questions, and I'll give the floor to, give the screen to being Professor Ida.
Hi, Coco. Hi, Professor Sarmento. Thank you for your lecture. Actually, it's very, very impressive. I would like to first say a couple of words about your lecture. You talk the first part. You talk about the intercultural competence. That part to me is very interesting because to most Chinese intercultural scholars, we are heavily influenced by the American theories of intercultural studies. They talk about human communication or interpersonal communication. But you, I think that you cited a lot of theories from post-modernism or post-colonialism theories. That's very good. I like them. And like some famous person like Derrida, like Homi Bhabha. I think that a lot of person maybe should be mentioned as well, like Bakhtin. Bakhtin emphasized a lot about the self and other. That part is, I really like that part. Very good actually. Personally, okay, it seems that time is very short. I don't have time to summarize. But let me ask you a question. Can I? Maybe it's not a question. Maybe just discuss with you that. To me that since you, I mean, that in Europe, I guess, in my imagination, that a culture, the boundary of different cultures becomes what? Becomes blurred. Yes. So you talk about intercultural study. I noticed that you put a slash behind inter, or to most, I guess, to most Chinese scholars, looks like you are talking about culture studies. I think the reason is that the boundary of cultures becomes blurred. That's because you or most Western scholars maybe are heavily influenced by the postmodernism theories. But for some Chinese scholars, we are still heavily influenced by the modernism. We still think that I don't mean all. I mean some scholars Chinese scholars might still think that culture like still have certain boundaries. So we still focus more on intercultural studies. But your lecture is a very good point for us to rethink about the definition of the term. I mean, in China, intercultural studies is a very important part for language learners to cover in the field. But previously, we focused more on the boundary, the boundary of different cultures. Looks like there's clear differences between different cultures. But your lecture to me is focus more on culture studies. And I like that part. You think that culture can be regarded as what? Profitable community. And you did talk a lot of, like in your that master program or in your the last project is Street Art Say, that project. You used that culture studies or culture as a part of what looks like a part of a capital for the Buddhist word capital to help to push the industry, especially tourism industry development. That's very good. That's good. Inspiring point for a Chinese scholar to think. In fact, in China, Chinese scholars, like including me, I have also realized that, like for example, in south or west part of China, when we talk about the minority or ethnic area in that area, so we talk about the tourism, we also focus more on the local culture or local, how to say, minority or ethnic people's identity, because their culture or their, how to say, cultural products can be regarded as a form of profitable economy as well. That's why I think that's why people would like to travel to there, to bring what, to bring I should say, to bring wealth, certain wealth to local people, to push their, to help them. I cannot say it's help, because this is their culture. They have the right to use their culture to help their own economic development. Any other good points? I like that last project, because that project is like a good platform, not just for people, for scholars to do the research, but also a platform for students to get involved, learn, to collect the data. That's a very good point. And how to say, I think is meaningful for us to think further as well. Thank you very much. I think it's very, very impressive. I like that part, because I did my PhD in Australia. I cannot say heavily influenced, but I say influenced by the, how to say, post-colonialism or post-modernism theories. So I could understand some. Thank you very much, Professor Sarmento. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see.
Thank you so much. So honored.
Let's see whether other scholars have or audience have their questions. Yeah. Is there any questions from our audience?
Hi, Professor Sarmento. It's very impressive for your talk. Really, very great, especially when you talk about how to integrate interculturality with business, especially talk about like into like football league, into like tourism, street arts, enlarge my view, and to in this field, the put interculturality into practice. So my question is, as we all know, interculturality, so emphasize on the encountering, the process of encountering, for the uncertainty, for the the othering, or this kind of thing. So sometimes it's not all the time as happy as like street arts or tourism. So we do have some sad stories in the society. For example, I'm not sure in Portugal, but you talked about like some refugees, immigrations into Portugal. So for them, you can see they have different languages, religions, lifestyles. So so do you have any training program how to put the theories of interculturality into practice, to help them to the new environment in Portugal, so they can they help them to have a feeling of belonging, instead of being a sense of like being othered by local people or something. So thank you. That's my question.
Thank you so much. A very pertinent, important question right now, because right now we are facing the Ukrainian refugees. We have been dealing with several waves of migrations as well. So first of all, the High Commission for Migrations in Portugal that we work close with, they follow a policy of, how can I say, of not constructing ghettos of migrants. So migrants and refugees, they are scattered around the country in areas with low demography, and that are in need of new inhabitants in working age. So this is the integration is facilitated by the fact that migrants and refugees, they are placed all around the country in places where their working power is actually needed, because we do have this problem of an almost deserted inland as a contrast to a coastline that has a too dense demography. So this works as a sort of a help firsthand. Another point that is also quite important, and that we actively collaborate with them, is on courses on entrepreneurship for migrants, so that migrants can either we use our expertise in entrepreneurship as a business school, and we apply that to the possibility of migrants and refugees to create their own business or become integrated in an easier way in already existing business. And you mentioned so well different styles, and one of those differences that is actually an asset is the gastronomy. And in Portugal, even for touristic purposes, we already boast the existence of several restaurants and food-related business and ventures that have been created by migrants and refugees. So again, the difference is an asset for business. So this is one of the happy characteristics of this policy of applied interculturality. Of course, there are good cases, there are more difficult cases, but also talking about, Professor Adams said a few minutes ago about that idea of synthesis and merging and blurring of boundaries. That is the characteristic of Europe. There is also an interesting characteristic in Portugal that sometimes facilitates a little bit our work, is the fact that at the same time, we are a country of immigration, because we welcome refugees, we welcome migrants, all sorts of. However, we are also a country of emigrants. There is to say, we have, just think about Paris, we have 1 million of Portuguese born people living there, because especially since the 50s, the 60s, of course, the 60s of the previous century, we had an enormous waves of emigration, thousands and thousands and thousands of people leaving the country, a country with such a small population of 10 million only. So you can imagine that, first of all, we are a nation of immigrants, of people who live to work and survive elsewhere. And as of the 90s, we have also become a country of immigration. First, we had the waves of refugees from the former African colonies after the revolution and decolonization and devolution in Africa. Okay, that was a sort of refugees, 1 million incoming in 1 year. But then I think that we can put a spot on the 90s, on the mid-90s, when we actually became a country of immigration, first from Brazil, and then from the Eastern Europe, and then from India, Pakistan, China as well. So of both emigration, we are an interesting platform of both emigration and immigration at the same time. And that allegedly makes us a little bit easier for us, scholars, researchers, and practitioners in general, to welcome and integrate, because somehow we also have that experience of being welcomed, sometimes not that nicely, and being integrated elsewhere. And this is so interesting at the masters, for instance. At the very same time, we have projects and dissertations on the integration of migrants and refugees, and also works and dissertations, very good as well, very well done as well, on how we are integrated, for instance, in Germany, in Switzerland, and in Luxembourg. I'm just thinking from the top of my head of about 3 dissertations that have just been finished in the last 3 months. Also, academic works about our immigrant community in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Germany, all at the same time. This is fascinating. This is fascinating for refugees and migrants. And also this is fascinating while studying tourism, because again, we are a country that welcomes tourists. Actually, we need them to survive. I think that tourism is totally, these are the foundations right now of our economy. Without tourism, we will just simply, I think that in economic terms, we will disappear, unfortunately. So we are a country that totally is a host country for tourism, but we are also at the same time a country where people are tourists themselves. We are guests somewhere else, and we are hosts at home. So in both these two platforms of intercultural transit, that is migrations, broadly speaking, and tourism, broadly speaking, Portugal is a very interesting case study because we welcome and we leave, we go and we stay at the same time. So this is complex, but this somehow gives us conceptual and practical tools to analyze the situation on both sides, to blend all the identities, only the newly arrived that we host, that we welcome, but we ourselves, we are also those who live and those who are welcome elsewhere.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Sarmento. I was quite inspired by your model. And so you integrate research and education and also business. I like the model very much. And I think in our center also we're doing intercultural studies in research, in teaching, and also in consultancy. But I think we are learning from the model, the integrated model, how theories can inform education teaching, okay? Yeah, and I think you mentioned the syllabus, and there are a lot of interesting courses, and also you've given us an example of street archive project. So that project for me is the vehicle to integrate intercultural theories and teaching learning practices in higher education for business students. Okay, I like that very much. And also how we can see the impact out of the project for society, for government, for education as well, and also for academic research. Okay, so yeah, I think that part inspired me quite a lot. And also another thing, I think we need to read your the books. I mean the two books, and to further pick up all those new concepts. For example, intercultural business. So what does that mean by intercultural business? And for example, I think you mentioned a lot of issues or aspects from interdisciplinary perspectives. So that is we need to do more reading, because I think we share similarities. We're from University of Finance and Economics, and also we're cultivating students in the similar disciplinary background. And also these are the areas we can, I think I'm looking forward to further collaboration. Yeah, maybe we can talk more about research as well as education, how research can inform education reform in both undergraduate and master levels. Okay, and also I think this is just a start for the intercultural dialogue between the two universities. Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We will be honored.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If there's no further question from the floor, can we say, so that's the end of today's event. And we would like to express our gratitude to Professor Sarmento, and also to the participants in today's talk. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll be more than happy to share my PowerPoint presentation with you if you accept.
Oh, great.
I can, it's a bit heavy to share it here on the chat. So perhaps I could send you by email or file share somehow. And then if anyone in the audience is interested, please share it. It's public. It's open.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay,
thank you to you, and thank you for the invitation, and to everybody in the audience. Thank you so much for being here.
Very impressive lecture. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Bye-bye.